and live a life of well-being.
Absolutely.
And you know, Chip, when you were talking about Sid as a leader, he certainly was not a leader before he had this experience. In his insecurity from time to time, at the work and in his life and so on, he didn't see himself as a leader. He says this publicly on his tapes, that he was an insecure man. But he was compassionate, he was kind, he was generous and thoughtful. He would give anybody the shirt off his back. But if you would have ever said to him, do you consider yourself a leader? I know he would have said no. He felt put upon sometimes by the leaders at work. And yet the miracle of this experience that happened to him is that when he went back to work, the top leader at his work sought him out because of this quiet, unbidden, unrequested leadership that just came out in him, in confidence, in certainty. And as someone who knew something, you could feel that about this man.
No doubt.
That there was something he knew. And so the leader, the top leader of this plant that Sid worked at, sought him out, took him to his office, and they engaged in conversation for several hours, to the point where Sid finally said, I think I need to get back to work, because my supervisor is going to be wondering where I am and why I'm not doing my job. And the leader said to him not to be concerned. I'll take care of it. And that continued to happen in the 10 months that Sid was at work, is that some of the supervisors and managers in the plant that Sid had some perhaps not great experiences with or engagements with, came to him. Again, sought him out about, well, what do you think about this, Scotty? They'd say to him. What do you think about this? What do you think we should do in this situation? There's some talk going on in the corner. What do you think we should do about him? That quiet leadership. When he started to talk to psychologists, this was an eye-opener for Ken and I, because we were intimidated by the notion that, these professional people are coming to the island with all this education. I was rather nervous, and I remember the first psychologist that came to the island, and Sid invited Ken and I down to have tea and meet these psychologists. I won't go into the story about the psychologists when they came down, other than to say that the picture they presented was not one that I had in my mind. I had somebody being in suits and ties and shirts.
Yeah,
and
right.
The ones that arrived were very casual indeed. One arrived with crutches, but that was also the era of the casual dress in the early to mid 70s. And so it wasn't the picture I thought. But as I got to know them, I saw that they had this professional curiosity and hope for something that worked, for a psychology that worked. Because up to that point, they were committed enough to helping people, but they weren't getting the results they felt should be there, and that's why they came. They came to the island because they were hearing about the results on the island, and they were hearing rumors that the person that was helping these people that were, that this was an ex-welder. And how could an ex-welder help people find mental health? So this, of course, evoked a lot of curiosity, and in hindsight, I can see why.
Oh, yeah.
But I admired their courage. I admired their commitment to helping people. And when Sid started to talk to them, then I found myself looking at Sid in another way, because he spoke to them again so simply, so directly. he listened to them with the greatest of interest and respect, would ask them questions, would draw out of them what they felt mental health was. And then when he listened to them, he would point back gently but directly, well, why would you take your clients back into their problems and the suffering when you're trying to help them find mental health? This doesn't make sense. But he said it, just as direct, like an arrow piercing
Absolutely.
right through to their soul, and yet with compassion and matter-of-factness, that it left them pondering, you have a point, Mr. Banks.
Sometimes.
I never thought about that, taking them back into their problems, and that's true sometimes.
But someone had a tremendous amount of courage. They really did. But it amazed me too. Like I'm like everybody else in the world at that point. I think authority comes from your degree, your education, and it does for many fields, and I guess it still does for the fields of psychology and psychiatry. But this was a different kind of authority. This was the authority of knowing, and that's when I would watch him talking to people back then, I think, man, this guy's got a lot of nerve, But then I realized it wasn't even that. He was just telling them flat out what he saw. But because of how he lived and held himself, even in that particular moment, he had all the authority in the world. He had the only authority, actually, because they were wondering and he knew. And that is hard for people to comprehend, especially with this uneducated welder. But if you look at that, you have to look back at the miracle of what occurred to him. This guy was just walking along minding his own business, and there was a crack in the universe, and it just dropped on him. That's the way I look at it. He wasn't looking for it. He never thought about it before. He says in many of his talks he had never thought about consciousness or consciousness raising. He just started to read a little bit about, having a better relationship and that kind of stuff. But this just dropped out. It just dropped on him. And I also started to just get an inkling as I watched some of those conversations and listened to Sid talk, was that, as much as he wanted it to go out to psychology and psychiatry, because he knew how much human suffering could be affected by that, when he was with somebody, he wasn't talking to a psychologist, like you said. He was talking directly past their presentation to their true self. Sid's addressing of anybody was always to address their true self. That's who he spoke to. That's who he tried to teach us to speak to first find it for ourselves, and only address the person's true self, not their issues, not their problems, not their ego. And I came to have at least a little bit of understanding that this man had an authority that I'd never seen anywhere before. It didn't come from any history, it didn't come from any doctrine, it didn't come from any dogma, it didn't come from any university, but it was a profound authority.
I love that, Chip. I love that, the authority of knowing, true knowledge. Yeah. And I know some of, like, his friends, because Sid shared this with Ken and I. He shared it with some of the folks that he worked with that we also had a social relationship with. And he took delight, as you and Jan know, he took delight in often saying at public talks that Ken and Elsie were the only couple that really stuck with him, and that was nip and tuck.
Right, as he would say.
It was pretty dicey,
right.
And it's true because there was, and I won't get into my story because I really want to keep to Sid, but it was nip and tuck indeed. And I remember one woman that then did not really stick with him, but came back after. She took the circuitous route, and it took her a little bit longer than me, and I was a slow learner. But I remember her saying to him once, when we were together, well, Sid, it's this arrogance that you have. You're so certain. Couldn't you say you think you know,
right,
instead of you know? And I remember Sid responding to her something like, but dearie, if I say I think I know, I mean, that wouldn't be any good. Would you go to a mechanic if he said, well, I think I know how the engine works? Or would you go to a shoemaker if he said, well, I think I can fix your shoe? Or would you go to somebody that said, I know how to fix your car, and I know how to fix your shoe? Oh, and it stopped her in her tracks. So I love what you say, that he had the authority of knowing, of true knowledge.
And the proof of the authority of that authority over the years was how people were affected. I mean, you could feel the authority. You knew it was real if you were open to it. But over time, it's also been proven by the works that flowed from it. You know, and by all of us being able to attain at least a little bit of that same authority, which is the only authority any of us have. I don't care how many courses you take on the principles or whatever, is what you know. You know, what you know in your heart, what you can share from your heart. That's your authority. And if it's something you know and it's touched you and moved you, it's all the authority you need. What else do you need? You know, you can have a diploma, but, you know, I've never taken my diploma and put it in a person's face who was hurting and have them change.